Hey guys, and welcome to the Fish Room. I'm Rachel O'Leary, and it's time for a Tuesday tip. Now this week we're doing a quick and dirty tip, and that is on some of the most commonly used things in my fish room that most people probably already have at home. And we're going to start with masking tape or painter's tape. I find this to be exceptionally useful when you're maintaining aquariums. It doesn't leave residue on the glass, or if it does, it's easy to remove. It's easy to label fish, especially in quarantine, with what they are, when you got them in, and if you've had to medicate, what days you medicate. It can be tricky to keep all that straight if you're doing a few aquariums at once. I also like to use this to lay out boxes on my floor in order to do mock-ups with hardscape or get ideas for, aquascaping or things like that. But all in all, this and the blue painter's tape are things that I use all the time. If you remember correctly, I'll even label my quarantine equipment with this stuff so that I can keep everything separate to prevent cross-contamination. It's really useful and really cheap, and most people already have it. I tend to stay away from tapes that are stickier because then you do have to remove the residue. So painter's tape is my favorite. I have a whole bunch of different colors, and I also use this big masking tape. Up next is a chopstick. I have shown you guys, and I'll link to it, in the past how I utilize chopsticks in my heavily planted aquariums. I will rubber band this to the bottom of my siphon so that when I'm hovering over my carpeting plants, I can poke into the substrate, disrupting some of that mulm and helping to prevent secondary pests like planaria, detritus worms, hydra, etc., as well as getting rid of that sort of black ring of mulm that develops below the substrate. It's really cheap, really easy. You can also use these a lot of the time in assisting with planting. You can poke it in there and then stick your plant in, and they can really help. I think that things like this are extremely useful and so inexpensive it doesn't make any sense not to keep them in the fish room. Up next is clip lamps, and most specifically the clip lamp clip. I use this tool every single day. I use it to clip to my sink here, and then I'll run my hose through it so my hose doesn't fall onto the floor. I'll hook it to my aquarium in order to hold my hose as I'm doing water changes, because rarely do I have time to stand there and specifically watch every single water change. And without fail, my hose ends up falling on the floor and making a huge mess. So this is something that I use all the time. Now I also like to use the entire clip lamp component, especially on my quarantine tanks. Now, on the word of quarantine tanks, I like to keep around a bunch of different Tupperware sizes. This one is a Sterilite container. Now, this is a Sterilite container that I just picked up from Target. They're really cheap, like $2, and I like to use these for a few things. Not only are they useful for storing equipment, but I like to use these for my actual quarantine aquarium. You can easily poke holes through the lid to run airline. They're clear so you can see into them. You can attach a heater to it because it has flat sides, and they're very easy to maintain. But the biggest issue I had when I was a hobbyist was that every time I set up a quarantine tank, it became a display tank, and that is not a big risk with an ugly Sterilite container. They're stackable, they're easy to break down, and they'll fit in most aquarium stands for when they're not in use. I think they're an invaluable tool, especially for those of us who are afflicted by the dreaded multiple tank syndrome. You guys also know that I like to keep a lot of these food type Tupperware containers in the fish room. I use them for incubating my apple snails, which I'll provide a link for. I use them for cultivating live foods like microworms. I use them for storing my rapashi foods in the refrigerator. I do recommend, though, that you keep your own set separate from your home Tupperware, because sometimes spouses, children, whatever, roommates get a little upset if they find you've been using their food Tupperware for something that's a little less savory. But all in all, they're customizable, easy to use, easy to store, super cheap, and something most of us already have. Now, my top tool in the fish room is the simple, basic razor blade, and I keep packs of these everywhere. This is without a doubt the best tool for removing green spot algae. It's useful for cutting plants, it's useful for cleaning glass, removing calcium deposits, removing water spots, all in all, it's just a super versatile tool, and with how cheap they are, there's no excuse not to have any. Now, one thing I do with these lids and my razor blade is I'll use this lid as my planting tray when I'm getting ready to plant a new aquarium, and then I can trim all my plants to size on this lid using this tool to be able to plant and get a really nice aesthetic overall. Anyway, these are just some of my favorite tools that I like to keep in the fish room that you probably already have, or it wouldn't cost you much to get them. As always, thank you guys for your continued support. Please make sure you stop by all my social medias, my Instagram at Ms. Jinxed, my Facebook Invertebrates by Ms. Jinxed, and my website MsJinxed.com. I've been running some giveaways that are going to be continuing through to the new year, and I don't want you to miss any of them. As always, let me know below if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions.